So Liz, I'm going to go back to about a year and a half ago. You're sitting at your kitchen table working on your first screenplay, and I guess you say to yourself, Tom Hanks, Meryl Streep, Steven Spielberg, that's the plan? Is
It was really obvious for me at the time that was totally going to happen. Yeah.
Tell me what the inspiration was. What were you doing when you sat down to write it, and what was the story that you felt was important to tell?
You know, I had just sort of, I'd read Personal History by Katharine Graham years ago, and I just had sort of fallen in love with her and always wanted her story to be out there. And I was sitting at my kitchen table, and I had been writing for a while and had never really gotten going. And my husband actually said, "Write the movie about Katharine Graham. Just write it, and because that's what you care about, you know." And that's what it was. That was the story I cared about. I cared about her because I saw myself in her. I saw a woman who was trying to find her voice, who had, lived in a time when women weren't supposed to have opinions or have jobs or anything like that. And it didn't matter that I wasn't 55 years old or living in 1971. I still, have found myself in rooms of all men and had that. So that was sort of where I was starting.
And Amy, this script comes to you, I think, in October of 2016, barely a year ago. It lands on your desk, and you read it, and what's your reaction?
There was a young man that works for me who is very enterprising and stole the script off some agent's desk who Liz was trying to get an agent that weekend. And he said, "I think that you're going to like this." And I did. And then I bought it. And then I called Liz. And then Steven called me and said, "I think I want to make this movie."
One of your first calls is probably our conversations with Ellen Lewis, your casting director, and things have to move really quickly. So tell me a little bit about the casting, about Ellen's role, and how Tom gets on board.
Well, Steven gave the script to Tom and Meryl, and they read it right away, and that was on a Friday, and on Sunday, they were making the movie. I don't think anything's ever happened like that in the history of movies. The other thing was Steven, I think it was March 3rd, where he called and said, I like this. I like this. I'm going to think about it. And we were shooting in May.
Yeah.
So I don't know if anybody else in the world could have pulled that off, but Steven, it was quite miraculous.
I'd also say like Christy and Amy, who put this movie together in a way that I don't know that anybody else could have in that amount of time.
Yeah, that's true. It's interesting because I had all women producers on this, and that was wonderful because things get done when that happens. Bunch of guys sit around, we kind of like kibitz a little bit too much, but there were a lot of fires being lit, and of course the evening news was lighting most of the fires, but we really felt that we could get into the national conversation and make this movie as quickly as possible and make it as well as we possibly could. If we had another 6 months of pre-production, production, and post-production time, we still couldn't have done any more than we did to get this in 9 months onto the screen.
And Janusz, so much of this film is set inside. Did you, what was that? How does that present a particular challenge for a story like this when so much is happening inside offices, inside homes, inside houses, inside conference rooms?
I just think the physical aspect of production is never hard for me because I love making movies. And the story was as such that dictated itself to be inside. So that's not really difficult to approach. The biggest aspect of my life, of my professional life, is to find the visual palette that I can put on the screen so the audience can understand what I'm trying to do, and making the visuals, particularly the lighting, relevant to what's happening right now. We're all talking about the movie looking like 1970s, and I kind of feel a little bit like a failure because I wanted to look like 2017, because it's so relevant to what we're going through as a nation. But at the same time, once you have great makeup, once you have great actors, great wardrobe, great props and cars, you put the camera and it looks like 1970s, so you really don't have to force the period. Mm-hmm. In fact, I had to restrain myself to be more relevant to what's happening right now with stylistically in the movies, so it doesn't feel dated, because it's such an essential aspect of my job to make it current and relevant to to the current audience.
Rick, so much of the production design is focused on the mechanics of what it takes to put out a newspaper, the presses, the linotype machines, the composing, the newsroom. Was that something that you and Steven talked about very early on, about feeling the actual texture of the newsroom, almost the smell of the ink, and how a newsroom actually, because I remember when this happens, the newsroom vibrates when the printing presses start turning?
No. But good question. No, I think it's really hard in a movie like this, for me anyway, I'll just have to say, to address the technical specifics of our crafts, and because we were so in the service of not only trying to make it real for Steven and Tom and Meryl and all the actors when they come into their environments, but to set a tone that you could say it's impossible to actually visualize this. But I think what you're hearing here is we know how to do jobs, and we do those jobs the best we can, and we communicate sometimes without talking, and we get in there and we do the work. But in many ways, that's like the newspaper business, and getting in there, and actually the filmmaking process that we had on this was very much like getting to the truth, getting to the source, getting to the authenticity. And that could be difficult if you look at it as a sum of lots and lots of details. We had such a great crew of mostly women from New York, and particularly Rena D'Angelo, the set decorator, and the art directors, that just gave themselves 1,000% to this movie. So that what happened was, we all found that we were doing this about something. And I think that it's a story of conscience. And this is how conscience works. Somebody does something. McNamara, for whatever reason, was having that study made. Ellsberg got a little bit of that and thought, I got to do something different with this. Then the newspapers picked it up, then more newspapers, and then finally the nation. So when I say that, I have to say that because that's how we made the movie. We all knew that this is what we wanted to make the movie about, and then we all brought everything that we could to bear in our various crafts and art forms.
Tom, I want to ask you, as an actor working in Rick's sets and with Ann Roth's costumes, and about how much that helps you and how much the actual verisimilitude of the newsroom helps.
It's priceless. It's absolutely priceless. So much of what actors do is based on what these environments and particularly costumes do to your muscles. You cannot wear these pants and these shoes. Ann Roth will put you through 3 hours of just seeing the proper width of a collar. And you end up giving yourself over to, you're almost like a blank canvas and she's painting, or you're modeling clay. Because she will find, we had a discussion of asses. We said, look, you know, Ben wore these kind of like those double knit Sansabelt slacks kind of things from this. And what is it? His ass looked great. He had a barrel, and he said, well, first off, Mr. Hanks, he had a great ass. But then it ends up bleeding into why does he wear these clothes? What is this style that he has? He rolled his sleeves up perfectly. He smoked a cigarette perfectly. And she says, walk with me, walk for me. Try these shoes and walk. So you're walking, Do the thumbs. And then I do the thumbs in the pants. I said, I don't like the shoes aren't right. Try these. Do you know why Ben owned the room when he walked into it? Do you know why, Tom? And I said, because he knew. And Ann said, because he knew. And that's it's not just fabrics. She's read it. She knows it. She studied the man, the posture, the gravitas, and she does that. And I mean, she's not represented here, but Steven started calling her his co-director.
No, I called her my boss. When I first met her, Meryl's the one that brought her in and introduced me to her. And she said, well, here's what your movie's going to look like. And she did a 10-minute monologue about the way the film was going to look. And I just started calling her boss from that day on.
Amy, I want to follow up on something Tom was talking about. We're all talking about it. That's the women who made this film. You, producer Christy McCosco-Krieger, Stacey Snider at Fox, Ellen Lewis, Ann Roth, Liz, your screenwriter, Meryl, obviously. Why do you think Kay's story and the women who made her story is so resonant and important to tell today?
Well, I think there's a scene in the movie where she's in the boardroom and she knows the answers to all the questions, and she's studied really hard. She's studied more than anyone else has, and she says the answers under her voice, and she can't get the words out, but she sort of whispers them, and then someone else says them and says, "Yeah, right, that's what it is."
That's a man said it, yeah.
Yes, and I have had that experience. I think any woman in this audience has had that experience. When the whole entire company is working for you, they're still not listening to you. That's not so far-fetched. And that scene and the way that Steven did it and the way that Liz wrote it was so resonant for me and so resonant for Stacy. It was one of the first things that we talked about, because women still haven't found their voice. They still haven't found a way to talk about how they feel and what they're thinking. And, we started this long before, Hillary was going to be the president and Harvey Weinstein was still running the Weinstein Company. These things are true always. They've been true for a very long time.
And I want to ask you this last question about the relevance of this period film today and what it has to say about the importance of a free press and the way in which the press was under attack back then and the way in which it's under attack now, and what you would hope people would be encouraged to think about after they watch this film.
You could possibly take all of the articles of the Constitution and put them on a different piece of paper, as long as you have that first article, which is freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion, and freedom of the press. You could probably extrapolate all of our American democracy from that one article, because it's based on common sense, and it is also guaranteed. There's a reason those guys put it first, because up until that point, governments could throw people in jail if they weren't the right religion, if they printed the wrong stuff, if they said the wrong things, or if they hung around with the wrong people. The very basis of who we are is, as a country, is based on our ability to think and read and hang out with and worship as we deem it to ourselves. In the interviews that I saw of Ben Bradley, he said, well, the Pentagon Papers now, if you were to look at it, you'd probably say, well, what's the big deal? It's an old study, it's old news, it doesn't mean anything, but they were going to try to shut us down over old news? It doesn't make any sense. Well, that's almost a quaint, innocent, naive take on what is day in and day out now, an assault on the truth. And I'm sorry, there is only one truth. But if it is put out there to say, I understand you have your facts, I don't believe them. Well, that's like saying 2 + 2 = 5. And that's something George Orwell wrote about in Big Brother. So it is as relevant as can be. And this is what great filmmakers, great writers, great producers, great artists, and one-time celebrity actors, who, when they decide to tell a nonfiction story, put out a piece of nonfiction entertainment that is based on something that happened 50 years ago, it can have happened 150 years ago. It actually speaks to that biblical sense of vanity, all is vanity, there's nothing new under the sun. The good news is that we all know what happened to Nixon. It took a while, but that very same Constitution and that very same first article brings down tyrants. And it brings down those that are trying to obfuscate the truth and put a stain in the pure water that is the United States of America.
Thank you all for coming out.